Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, and thanks to our virtual audience as well for joining us. We are very excited, as we always are, because DJ Box here has been for all of us folks. I'm trying to remember, I think open season maybe not, but everything, every single one. Okay. And so, as you know, Cassie Dewell is the series that we're going to be talking about this evening in Treasure State. And Cassie, we should talk about that first. Cassie has changed her trajectory and what she does. And in the last book before this, she established herself in Montana after various unfortunate or fortunate adventures and has taken up as a private investigator. So, how did she get there?
How did I get there? I never really wanted to write more than one series, and for years, after the third Cassie Dewell book, people were asking me, are you writing another series? And I would say, no, I call them all standalones with Cassie Dewell. But I began to really like that character and that arc and that narrative. I like writing Cassie Dewell. And it's weird, you know, I mean, whenever a male writes a female protagonist, that's you're trading on him a little bit. And the first time I did a book solely with Cassie as a protagonist, I gave the manuscript like I always do to my wife, my 3 daughters, my female agent, and I just waited. And it was like the dog that didn't bark. None of them came back and said, a woman would never think like this, say this, do this. They had other notes on the book, and none of them ever said it's unrealistic, whatever, and that made me feel good. And I really like the character. And the new book talks a little bit about, you know, the show Big Sky. This is my Cassie, and I don't have any problem writing my Cassie, even though there's a Cassie in it. It's totally different. So yeah, I always wanted to write a PI books. And originally kind of shied away from that because it's such a trope in a way, but I thought, you know, a PI in Montana, woman-owned would be an interesting way to take it. And I'm glad I did.
The game one and why did you want to do it in Montana? I love the way that private investigations are structured and something the joke are because basically they move forward with some kind of reasonable progression. Almost the case, thrillers often take a different structural tack. But do you approach the joke tickets in the same way in terms of structuring the story, or is it very different?
I would say, in a way, the Cassie Dewell books are a little bit more plot-driven as opposed to events or controversy-driven. You know, each of the Joe Pickett books always starts with something, usually 2 different storylines. One that's kind of ripped from the headlines, usually about natural resources to some degree, and then another element of something else that's going on in contemporary West. I don't feel that necessary to do that with the Cassie Dewell books because they're a little more traditional in regard to solving the crime, taking on a client, trying to satisfy that client's need. And so that's a whole different thing. Joe is often in a situation where the world's just coming at him, and something's happening and he has to react to it, where the private investigator picks and chooses her clients to some degree and goes along that way. So it's a little different structure, a little different motivation. Cassie Dewell very open about the fact that she likes to make some money in this job, as opposed to Joe, who's a state employee. And Cassie's business is doing extremely well. And you know, did some, you know, like I always do, I did some research, talked with a couple of private investigators in Montana about what they charge, who their clients are, what kind of cases they've got, before ever starting any of it. And I enjoy that kind of thing.
You have actually quite a background, personal background, in spending time in Montana, which makes it more authentic. So what's your history in the state of Montana? Because we tend to think, even though the joke because they're filming Canada, you all know that, right? So I think we were talking at sort of snack CJ and I had, if you don't know it's in Canada, when you think it was in Wyoming when you're watching it, it's very, very but anyway, what's your history with Montana?
Half of my relatives growing up were scattered across Montana on my mom's side. So we spent a lot of time. And then before the books hit, I had a tourism company, international tourism promotion company. Tori and I worked together. She was Best Western. And I worked for the state of Montana for 23 years, meaning I led tours across Montana with journalists, tour operators, visited just about every corner of the state. You know, I challenge Montanans sometimes to name a town that they think I haven't been to. I think I've been to them all. And there's a real similarity between Wyoming and Montana in the outlook on life. You know, very much hunting, fishing, outdoor oriented. The one exception to all of it is what I wrote about in this book, which are the old mining communities of Butte and Anaconda, Montana, which very much stand out from the rest of the state in their origins and view, culture. And I've always been very fascinated with those areas. So I thought it would be fun in a Montana book to concentrate on those communities. I can't wait. Next week, I'm going to, part of this tour, go to Montana. I want to hear some reactions. I think they'll mainly be positive. People in Anaconda and Butte are very proud of where they live. And I can't remember what I was talking to about that night. In Butte, Montana, they'll, if you ask them where they're from, they won't say Butte, Montana, they'll say Butte, America. So they just have a different view. But part of the heritage, does anybody here from Montana? So you can argue with me. One of the biggest difference between people in Wyoming and Montana is that many people in Montana have a much more severe anti-big business point of view. And that comes from the huge mining companies that really exploited workers early on. They're the only town in America to ever have a purely socialist city council was Butte, Montana, back in the 1920s. And that's where labor unions all began, was there. And where the U.S. government sent in federal troops to keep the miners from rioting. It's really very interesting history.
Jeff Walters wrote an interesting book about, I can't remember the name of it, but, you know, it is central. And you tend to think that the black movement came out of like, you know, New Yorkers and Montana. So the title of this book, Treasure State, it's got a double meaning. Treasure State being Montana, but there's also a treasure hunt. And did you remember reading about Forrest Finn, the art gallery owner in Santa Fe, who put together what he said was worth of stuff. And there he is, part out in, you know, the wilderness, and then, you know, set people loose. And it was really controversial. I think more than one person died looking for it, and it went on for a long time. And eventually somebody did find it. So I feel like you were slightly inspired by Forrest Finn.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That the Forrest Finn treasure poem, treasure maps. 5 people died. Forrest Finn he was asked about that later at one point. Are you afraid, sir, that so many people are dying trying to find your treasure? And he just said, they're idiots. You know, I'm an old man and I hid this treasure. Do you really think I was rappelling down the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone like I died? And he kind of had a point, but it was pretty cool. But there were lots of people in this treasure. I know of me personally. Some people devoted all their vacations to it. There were websites all over and long. You know, people were so-called experts in it. And Some people doubted that it ever existed, obviously, but it was found a few years ago. It's actually found in Yellowstone, which is, and the guy who found it didn't want to, he wanted to keep it a secret for a while, but that would have been possible. But I love the idea of a modern day treasure. So in this book, there's two big cases. One is she receives a call from a woman in Florida who said that this woman was seduced by this man who convinced her to turn over her entire fortune to him and save his company, then vanished. And the client thinks the man is from Montana. And she hires Cassie to see if you can find him. Cassie digs into that, finds out that this woman wasn't the only one who'd been built by this guy. That's one case. The other one is, she is hired by the man who wrote the treasure, which is based on Doris Finn's poem. And the man says, I will pay you $25,000 if you can figure out who I am. Because if you can figure out my identity, others can too, and they'll therefore have a leg up on finding the treasure. So Cassie, of course, accepts that challenge. And the two cases are going on at the same time.
It's basically, I happened to see that your academics are, strong. I forgot to mention that Forrest Fenn did create, what was the poem? It was, he didn't create a map, but there was a and it had clues about like the treasure, so a lot of it depended on what you decided. I actually met him in 1984 when I visited Santa Fe for the first time. He had a beautiful art gallery, was a very prominent figure in social and arts in Santa Fe, and he didn't. I think he didn't really have anyone to lead all of his things. Almost like last will and Testament kind of deals of that. So I didn't think the Forrest Fenn Gallery exists anymore, but bought by Andrew Machucci. Anyway, he was real. And there's a very good nonfiction book that came out last year by whose name, Patrick, you want to look it up? I can't recall it, but maybe I've seen it wrong. But it's really read about the entire thing. So anyway, treasure state, right? Yeah. And I do think, happy ending, there's sort of a happy ending in part for this book, which I thought was very well done. You had some nice reviews sort of mentioning it, but we have to circle around it. It's like really look for it. But we decided to be, what's the word I want? Generous?
Yeah, I don't want bad things happening in every book to every person, like I normally do. So I thought I'd throw a curve at the end of this one. Oh, that's all I'm going to talk about. It's where the ending. But it was a fun book to write. Some books aren't fun. This was really fun. And one of the most rewarding things about it is that my 3 daughters and my wife love this book. They love Cassie. One of my daughters annoys me by saying how much more she likes Cassie than Joe Pickett. I'm supposed to take that as a compliment. It was a fun book to write. It's not as menacing as The Highway. It was Cassie's first introduced against the Lizard King, which is pretty creepy stuff. This is more cases and certainly some danger works everywhere. And it certainly doesn't this one, but it's not as menacing or diabolical.
To read Bitterroots to really enjoy it, but I think if you haven't read Bitterroots, it's a good idea to read it, and that way you'll kind of see Cassie's transition and what she's doing in Montana, and this one will have a greater impact. Are you thinking, you don't really want to write 2 books here, but do you think that there might be?
I do think there will be another Cassie Dewell book. I don't know how many years. It's been 3 years since the last one. It's just simply because it's hard to write more than one book a year, which then I'm obligated to do one a year, Joe Pickett. So. But no, there'll be another one. I don't have the ideas yet. I do have an idea where it might germinate, and that is that in this book, Cassie Dewell takes on an intern in her private investigating company who happens to be named April Pickett from Wyoming. So there might be a little bit of a crossover possibility at some point. And April is a pretty fun character, right? As well.
It's Dave Romanowski is an only character. April manages to spend time with him. So talk to us about Anaconda and Huge, because they're fairly close together, right? But one's on like, it's almost like a British thing, you know, if you ever look at the history of some of the mining and the huge and terrible mining disputes and strikes and England, where you've got British people in one place and poor people are generally down below, aren't they? It's very rare that the poor people are really up high and the rich people are really down underneath them.
Yes, when copper was discovered in Butte, Montana, it was just discovered like right in town, and it was referred to as the richest hill on earth. And the copper mines were going in everywhere, side streets. They were pulling out copper. Copper got really expensive because of World War I, because the U.S. was starting to use electronics and need copper oil, wire. So the problem with copper, even though they're getting massive tons worth, one thing in Montana, so far from every place else, that they needed a smelter to smelt it. And they built one in Butte, but it was so stinky and the pollution was so bad that they decided to build one about 11 miles away in Anaconda. So that was very much Anaconda was a company town as opposed to Millionaires Row in Butte. They shipped the copper in cable car kind of things all the way to Anaconda. The tallest smokestack that has ever been built on Earth is still in Anaconda. You can see it from the highway. There's no building around it or anything else. It just sticks straight up into the big sky in the middle of nowhere. And I think 27 different nationalities in Anaconda, Montana, all tightly packed in tiny homes. And it's still like that. It's not a company town anymore. There's no more smelter. But the people that are very proud of their heritage, and to them, people in Butte are just kind of snooty. But they stick very close together. They're very tight. It's a fun place to wander around. It's not a tourist town, but it's kind of fascinating. It's fascinating because this is Montana, but it feels like when you're there that you're in some kind of Pennsylvania steel town from the 1880s that was dropped in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. It's that kind of feel, that background, that kind of culture. And so that's why I wanted to write about that. In the very beginning of the book, not giving anything away, this chapter 1, a private and unprivate detective from Tampa, Florida, is closing in, he thinks, on the guy who filmed this woman out of money. And he enters Anaconda and he never gets out. And that's the introduction to the book and the story.
Is there still copper in this area?
There's still copper there. There's some limited mining activity, but the fact is that the copper, the price is not big enough, not good enough to do that kind of wholesale mining. And if you've ever been to Butte, you've never seen, it's a super fun site, because they basically just leveled mountains and pulled it out that way. It's really, really dramatic mining that is not done anymore. And it's good, when you see how much damage was done. And I'm not saying this from the standpoint of somebody think all mining is bad and I can do that, but this is devastating stuff. That's what they don't do.
or Silver City, boy, you can really, see what we're talking about over there. I could hardly believe the whole spot there around Rincy, and my husband and I were driving it, and there were a lot of dips on the road, and everyone they would say, do not enter when flooded, but then you have like 25 feet to the next dip. So I said, I can't figure out, what would you do? If it really started to flood, there's nowhere to go, but you can look down and you can still see these enormous machines. In fact, there's a smaller version of our globe. It's they're like mesas that are made out of mining stuff over in the globe. Or if you ever take the little train in the Dirty River Valley that goes up to Sedona, goes up to a ghost town. There's a whole bunch of mining sort of slide there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Bisbee and Douglas are like that.
Bisbee, right, yeah, it's down the
Douglas,
yeah.
Melbourne.
Yeah, so it is, how are we going to clean up the super site? That's not part of your book. Did you look into that at all?
It's not a lot of the cleanup has been done already. But it's so massive, it may take years and years and years. There's actually a great 18-hole golf course on some of the old mine tailings now. They call it Old Works Golf. So they're slowly changing over, but several of the big tailing piles and literally like reservoirs, water that's just filled so mineral, contaminated that they'll probably never find another use for it. And that's around due to sapphire color. They look really pretty. You can see it from a distance, then you realize it's all chemicals. We're doing lots of mining shop.
So I really like this. I was reading, I can't remember to the environmental magazine that I was reading, but the American chestnut was up by it. Because we brought in chestnuts from Japan or somewhere. And now they discovered that the chestnut trees will grow on the old coal mining sites because they like really acid rock and soil and they don't care. So they're doing an entire replanting all around the old coal mining sites, building chestnut nurseries. So maybe there'll be some living triggers that we really don't know about. Right. So let's talk a little bit about the scammer in the book. The guy that is, we think, anyway, guilty, probably not just one woman, but as we progress, one woman out of money. Is this some guy that you actually know, or did you just say,
No, not based on anybody I've actually known. We do a lot of true crime, listen to podcast, listen to. I'm always amazed at very, very smart women fall for really, really bad guys. They're just too smart to have this happen. But there's something about some of these guys, and that kind of happens in this book a little bit, is when Cassie first meets him, she's almost embarrassed by the fact that she's really attracted to him and is very charming, and has to fight against that element in this as well. One thing I think is just, I hope you appreciate a little bit, at really fun to write, is the other case of finding the poet who has done the treasure hunt. Cassie figures she's got to start with writers, established writers. There's a couple of references in the poem. So she narrows it down and goes on a series of interviews with Montana authors. And a couple of them are normal, some of them are really bizarre. Some of them are so narcissistic. Not a certain author in mind for everybody. Don't ever recognize themselves, they never do. But that was fun to have a go from author, trying to figure out which one of them might be the survival.
in fact, take things in real life? How many of you remember the book in which the bad guy started in Scottsdale? Remember? Right. So I had an idea of reading copy, but it took me a long time to get around to it. And I got an occasional email, CJ, which I sort of stalled out, but anyway, I haven't read it now. You know, the killing field is right here in Scottsdale, but it's back by staying in the hotel alley. You know, I heard a really zany review it, and then it just DJ your face, I'm like, I never read it. So much fun to do that. So you do like to take actual places or people you know.
I do. I'm kind of, just over. I'm kind of a location predator in a way when it comes to whether or not, sometimes we do research for books. Other times, my wife and I go on vacation and we'll go to places where I'll think, it's in. In this case, there's kind of an important part of the book based in Boca Grande, Florida. And that's because we visited some friends there and we golfing and saw alligators on the golf course. Cool little thing. I never would have made that up if I didn't see it. So no matter where I go or what I do, I always try to incorporate that into some books and certain scenes. Because I think it brings some authenticity and it's also just fun for me to write.
Get more fishing scenes because, you know, CJ when he's not writing out in the water. Frankly, you had a tough summer where you couldn't go fishing, so I wouldn't expect him to be, certainly, you know, getting Joe, I mean, you could fish, and he gets all.
There's not more fishing. I'm passionate, like, just returned from a week in Sea of Cortez in Mexico, fly fishing for big dorado, rooster fish, tuna. It was great time and fish. But my inclination is that people don't really want to read about fishing. Even most fishermen don't really want to read about how well something do. The same reason why I would never include golf, which I do now enjoy, but it's boring as hell. You're reading about something who golfs so well. So I just leave those things out. I'll mention that Joe Pickett went fly fishing with somebody, but leave it at that.
I come from a golfing family and I don't subscribe to the, you know, novels of the lost soil. But, you know, that's one way. So yeah, actually, you have recently been able to join the Pretty Nifty Golf Club. Is that what you're doing when you're not writing editions?
It is. I'm a terrible golfer. I'm getting a little better. My wife likes it. I'm surprised she likes it. I put my golf away 40 years ago and never even picked one up until 2 years ago. And I was amazed how a lot of golfers here, good golfers. When I saw the new woods, I thought I was like Fred Flintstone compared to what I remember. So it's a whole different game. You can actually get the ball away. I do enjoy that.
What has happened to some of the earlier characters in the Cassie Dewell novels? I mean, did she drag anybody with her to Montana, or she left everybody behind?
No. There's some callbacks in this book. One in particular, if you read The Highway and then Paradise Valley in particular, actually Badlands is introduced, and that's Kyle Westergaard. He's a young boy, fetal alcohol syndrome to some degree, little off. Cassie saves him, and he shows up. He's looking for the treasure, along with everybody else. Trying very hard to dissuade him of that, but it was fun to bring him back. And that's one of my favorite characters. I'd be happy.
All right,
I might just yell back.
if we're going to take questions, you're going to have to repeat them because it's going to be here. So I'll turn mine off and you can just say.
Yeah, so my favorite part is Q&A. So we did a few early. Yes, ma'am.
Your experience with Falcons and how it's so wonderfully portrayed in books. I want to know what your own thoughts.
Thank you. The question is about falconry and falcons and where that comes Growing up in Wyoming, this is the strange thing. One of the few characters, in especially the Joe Pickett series, based on a real person, is Nate Romanowski. All the rest are fictionalized. And a friend of mine I grew up with in high school in Casper, Wyoming. He was a year ahead of me in school. He was a middle linebacker, big guy, blonde hair. And he went on to the Air Force Academy and then into Special Forces. And he was a falcon. And I was fascinated with it. I was never a falconer, but I would go falconry hunting with him quite often, and met a bunch of his falconry friends who were all out there, really out there, and spend time with them and kind of get that mindset that they had, and I always found it just really fascinating for all the reasons that I write about. And the guy based on Nate is still around, and I've sent him every book. He doesn't look like he used to, which is good for me because my wife always had kind of a problem. But that's what I learned everything about falconry. And luckily, other falconers tend to like the books. And a few years ago, they made me an honorary member of the California Hawking Club. Because falconers are like anybody, especially like gun guys or whatever. If I screw something up, boy, do they want it. And luckily, I've got very, very few experiences where somebody said you got this wrong, or this bird wouldn't do that, or whatever. I try to keep that very active. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Do you find that you rewrite sections of your books often? And if you do, is it your idea or does somebody suggest that to you?
You mean while I'm writing it?
Yes.
You mean? Sometimes I usually come up with the topics first, or ideas first, the issues first, and then do the research into those things so that I feel comfortable when I'm writing about them. Often I'll find experts in that field that I can question, and then when I write certain passages about things like Nick's Joe Pickett book has a lot of things about very remote crypto mining facilities. I don't know anything other than I see them when I'm elk hunting. And so I found people who build them, people who design them, and then when I wrote the book, I sent them those passages. So they can But usually I don't make a lot of, because I'm an outliner, I kind of have an idea from the beginning to end once I've done all the research. I do a bullet point thing throughout. There are diversions that get taken. Sometimes something will happen while I'm writing a book and I'll just incorporate that into it. But generally I try to stay pretty close to the outline so it doesn't go too far. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Enjoy your books and your book signings.
Thank you.
Tell us about your ordeal with your foot.
With my foot. It was horrible. Especially our summers are so short, and I like to get out and do things. Yeah, in June, we invited some friends to our house. We live not far from a really great fly fishing river. We took them on the river all day and they wanted to reward us by cooking us dinner that night. So he made this big pot and those aluminum roasters that you kind of ribs on the grill. And once it got hot enough, which we didn't know, I didn't know how cold it rendered all out. Anyway, we're going to take it off and we'll take this all the towards my right foot. So I got 3rd-degree serious, 2 surgeries, skin grafts, all this. And for 8 weeks, I was out of the game. And not until 3 weeks ago was I able to put a shoe on. It's last week I've been fishing and they want to book it. So it's coming along. But it sure is a long process. If you do that, get really sturdy pot. Yes. Oh, well, yeah. It's a dust.
We have to do this, I know it's really running up. Now, I just wanted to point out. I Dustin. I wanted to speak to the lady that asked about the falcons, because actually there's a lot of falconry here in Phoenix. Do you all know why? There's some very well-employed falconers here. They are hired by the various resorts and so forth to fly the falcons to kill all of the birds that, land on your food or, generally do it. So they're bird control. We had somebody who worked for us for a while in Memphis to go and be a falcon. With their own falconry business, which I think is, fascinating. You can go, there's several places you could go, actually, of course, if you happen to go there, you can go and they keep them down, and you just send them down to visit them, you can fly them. It's in Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland, there's which is my personal favorite business slogan of all time. Excellence since 1228. It's a bold Irish vehicle that they have developed. It's such a demand for it. A whole you can visit the views and see how it all works. They need as much it has to be, there's something strange with the wireless channel. Very strange. Anyway, thank you for your time.
I was wondering too if Curry Boyd's, I don't know if she's going to show back up.
I'm sorry.
She is a prominent TV show.
Cody Boyd,
His where?
Jenny.
Jenny Boyd.
Yes.
Jenny White does appear in his book. She's not as prominent as she is in the book. But yeah, she is in the book. Probably not. I can't think of why. She's in a different town completely, and never even thought of it. I never ruled anything out, but I don't have plans. That's like the worst spoiler you can ask me. Because two reasons. Why did Cody Wake die? One reason is I was writing a character and I started realizing, an alcoholic cop, like, oh man, this is unoriginal. There's so many of these stories out there. And I was getting kind of tired of them. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool? And this is the third book he was in. I thought it would be cool to kill him right in the middle of the book. I never read a book like that. You think you're reading a series at the beginning of a long time series and you just not. So I thought that really throws everything in a whole different light, and I like to introduce a different person named Cassie. And I read that one by my editor, and she just got quiet for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And finally she said, okay, try it, and both of us liked it. Wasn't strategic. I never do anything strategic. I thought I was on the road to writing it.
I really enjoyed seeing your characters come to life on TV. I'm very looking forward to season 2 of Joe Pickett. But to be Joe Pickett's #1 endearing quality is his integrity, and the initial introduction of him with his encounter with the sheriff and his love for nature and all that. It didn't come through as much, and I'm hoping that in season 2 we'll see more of that, because that is what makes you want to give Joe a big hug.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they did a very good job. Certain little things I would have tweaked if they would have asked me, would you have to do this, if you have to do that. it's kind of those things where they set close enough to the books that we were very pleased. And a few of the new elements that they brought in, I have to say, geez, I wish I would have thought, you know, not all of them, but a few of them. So it's just a very different experience. It's for the difference between writing and having TV series now. You know, people ask the difference. It's like the difference between being on a cruise ship or rolling by yourself down the river. You know, there's just too many people involved in collaborative things. You just hope they stick back with the most important thing. And my wife and I totally agree with this, and we kind of took this from Diane Gavin and Outlander, and that is, does it sell? And it does. It's like, you know, so now there's 2 1-hour commercials every week. And it really raised the profile of the books in terms of sales and exposure and all of that, and that's all the author can. In Mary, yeah, I think in the Joe Pickett series, I think they generally, you're always going to argue with some casting, but I think generally they did a really good job, and the character, the actress that they hired to play Mary Beth, I think is fantastic. I almost think she stole the whole show. And I never heard of her or anything before, but she just really embodies that character so well. So, and I think she could be more prominent in the future. Yes, sir.
Yeah, does Robert Redford still own the rights to Blue Heaven?
Right now, the only book that's not involved in TV is Blue Heaven, and it's being pitched right now as a by a team of showrunners and directors. I don't know, you know, it's been this would be like the 3rd or 4th attempt to do something.
Didn't Redford own it once? The rights?
No, he was trying to do the Joe Pickett show, Redford.
Oh.
And we were able to get out of that. My wife and I sometimes say, you know, we're the only people we know that fired Robert Redford. But he was going to take the show to take Joe Pickett in the direction that not a good one. Yes.
How did you know you wanted to be an author, and how did you get started?
I think just about every author kind of sort of hardwired that you're going to write, whether or not you sit down and make a decision, I'm going to be an author. I never did that like that. But I do remember even as like a 12-year-old boy in Casper, Wyoming, going to the library, going down stacks of shelves to the bees to figure out where my book would be someday. Thinking about that then. I didn't know what kind of book it would be, fiction or nonfiction or anything like that. And it did, you know, it took 20 years when I first wrote a manuscript getting published commercially. So, but it's something I always just did on the side. I always had another job. I was a starving artist. And I guess, you know, an awful lot of people want to write books, but sometimes they write really crappy ones, you know, that never see the light of day. I was lucky with the very first one, kind of came out of the gate in a big way. But then the second book, and then, you know, that's the hardest one. Hopefully I can answer your question. Yes.
I've read every one of the Joe Pickett novels.
Thank you.
And I actually haven't read them. I listened to them through Audible.
Fine.
David Chandler does a fantastic job. And there wouldn't be, in my mind, there'd never be another, I mean, he's like Grover Gardner does for Andy Carpenter in the David Roosevelt novels. But the fact that David Chandler does all your narration for Joe Pickett is amazing, and he keep doing them, I hope. But I noticed with the Cassie Dewell novels, the narrator changes from book to book.
Yeah, that's all exactly right. I'm very lucky in that there's been one David Chandler. Well, I've never met, by the way. But he has been there now 22 years. That's very rare, and people do like him. The Cassie Dewell ones have, yeah, they bounce around. It gets complicated. It's not like I go out and select you. The books, the audio rights are owned by different companies who have staff, contract. The last two have to be narrated by the same person. And I hope, if we do go on, that will continue. I think there's real advantages to that kind of continuity.
Thank you.
All right, you said the magic word is David Rosenthal, so I had to interrupt to say, he'll be at the store on October 11th. And it will be Golden Retrievers coming once again. It's really fun. I also wanted to say something to you because you asked about CJ's career. CJ's been really lucky in that he has had one editor for his entire Joe Pickett series, which believe me, publishing is truly rare. And even though he's no longer actually at the publisher, he's still editing CJ's books. And he's a very prominent guy. And CJ and I, in fact, are together because the editor wrote to me and said, I'm sending you this first novel by this guy in Wyoming. Read it. It's going to be important to you mine to, come see you in the offset. So you've really been very fortunate to have that kind of continuity, which makes a big difference, I think, in the series. And you like the way he works with you. I mean, there's all kinds of editing styles, but you're lucky that you mesh so well.
Sometimes, most important thing is to have a good editor. And I've been blessed that way. Only had one bad editor once. And that didn't go so well.
Construction of the community of people. With your first novel, did you have in mind that Joe and Mary Beth and the various sheriffs and Nate, and did you have this constellation of people, or did they grow over time as you wrote the book?
No, for the very first book, it was designed solely as a standalone book. It was going to be about, in my mind, the Endangered Species Act and how things can go. Well-meaning legislation can go badly on the ground with all the modern agenda. And that's how the book came about. I never thought, boy, the world was waiting for a Wyoming game warden. Not until that very first book did when the publisher accepted it. He said, we would like 2 more with Joe Pickett. And I'm still grateful that first book established the foundation that is now going into the 23rd book, that I never had to regret that initial book in the foundation. Barbara could tell you many more stories than I could about, authors who, for example, started their protagonist too old. And then 20 books down the line, what do? You freeze them in time, introduce them. Luckily, Joe Pickett was a young man, his family was young, the town still works, all those sort of things. But it was never strategic, and I never, in my wildest dreams, thought it would get serious.
Question about the semi-truck. What happened?
What do you mean, the semi-truck?
I mean, it's in front of her house, and then it disappears, and it never came back.
Well, correct. Who knows? I know exactly what you're talking about, but sometimes residential streets, the guy takes a nap and goes away, that mean anything happened. Not everything is explained. He was driving a smaller truck. but it was cinema.
You have to remember that the TV can be hard from books, and Big Sky probably is less CJ box than Joe Pickett, right? I would say. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming this evening. I think that the plan A, should you hear me now? I think the plan is for CJ to send your books out there. We can have you pre-sign everything, so if you don't want to